With a series as big and long running as Fallout, it's easy for certain details to get lost, misremembered, misunderstood, or even changed over time. Whether it's how the world works, what certain technologies do, or the timeline of major events, fan perception doesn't always line up with the lore. So in today's video, we'll be taking a look at 5 more common Fallout misconceptions and the real truths behind them. Let's get into it. Misconception number 1. The courier was shot once. Fallout New Vegas' intro cutscene is one of the most iconic moments in the franchise. We watch our protagonist get shot and buried in a shallow grave outside Goodsprings. It sets the stage and tone for not only what would become an epic desert adventure, but also the idea that the character we take control of, the courier, was able to take a bullet to the head and live. But here's the thing, it wasn't just one bullet. This misconception that the courier was only shot once is completely understandable. In the intro cutscene, we only see Benny fire his gun once. It's a dramatic moment. Benny draws Maria, says his iconic line about the game being rigged from the start, and pulls the trigger. One shot, fade to black, and that's all we see. So it's one bullet, right? Well, not quite. We find out the truth as early as the opening scene with Doc Mitchell. He refers to bullets, plural, during your conversation. Conversely, in your final dialogue with Lanius, he says, "I can see it upon your face where 2 bullets left their mark," confirming the courier was struck twice in the head. And if that's not enough, the forecaster at the 188 trading post also mentions multiple bullets. He cryptically says, "Your face does the thinking, 2 to the skull, yet 1 gets up. Odds are against you, but they're just numbers after the 2 to 1. So yes, the courier survived not only a bullet to the head, but 2 of them. I'd imagine that Benny was trying to be extra sure. After all, the worst thing that could happen is the guy you shot rises from the dead and hunts you down. That would surely be terrible. Misconception number 2. Fusion cores are just big micro-fusion cells. If you've played multiple Fallout games, it's easy to notice just how many energy, fusion, power cells, packs, and cores exist in the games. It's almost like you could mix and match any 2 of those words and end up with one of the game's ammo types. But not all of these power packs are the same. Notably, the fusion core, first introduced as a usable item in Fallout 4, can often be confused as a larger version of the micro-fusion cell, maybe a macro-fusion cell. At a glance, they seem like they'd serve the same purpose. Both are clearly tied to nuclear fusion technology. Both sound like they're running on the same kind of energy science, the idea of putting immense power inside of a small form. But they aren't interchangeable, and more importantly, they aren't even the same kind of tech. Microfusion cells are miniature nuclear reactors, and that's not an exaggeration. The item description for the microfusion cell in Fallouts 1 and 2 reads, "A medium-sized energy production unit, self-contained fusion plant." And a terminal at Fort Independence further corroborates this. A research log about the plasma rifle calls the fusion cell essentially a small fusion reactor. It would seem that microfusion, and by extension fusion cells, are capable of producing and generating their own energy through the process of nuclear fusion. It does this on a small scale, which is why they can power energy weapons like plasma and laser weaponry. They're not just glorified batteries storing power. In reality, they produce the power. In contrast, fusion cores are essentially high-capacity batteries. Preston Garvey says as such at the beginning of Fallout 4 when you're tasked with finding a fusion core. He calls them your high-grade, long-term nuclear battery, used by the military and some companies way back when. So it would seem, like many batteries, they don't generate their own energy. They simply store it in some form and convert it to electrical energy when needed. You can charge them, drain them, swap them out, and use them to run something heavy-duty, like a suit of power or a military-grade generator. And that's a major distinction, especially when you consider how they're used in the game's world. Microfusion cells are lightweight, efficient, and most often used for weapons and military applications. Fusion cores are heavy, industrial, and also have civilian applications, like being used to power cars, as evident by a Berkeley Springs terminal, and other heavy-duty applications. They're much bigger, yes, but they're also entirely different from a classic MF cell. So no, a fusion core isn't just an oversized microfusion cell. It's a whole other category of power source, built for a very different purpose in the Fallout universe. Speaking of nuclear technology, misconception number 3, uranium was abundant. When people talk about the Fallout universe, especially when it comes to pre-war, the conversation almost always focuses on the resource wars. After all, it's the most famous part of pre-war lore. The idea that wars were waged and the world collapsed because it ran out of oil. But what often gets overlooked is that other resources, like uranium, the lifeblood of nuclear fission power, was also running dry. It's easy to assume that nuclear energy was the solution to the energy crisis. After all, the Fallout timeline diverged from ours at some point and started leaning heavily into atomic power. So it raises the question, if nuclear power was the norm, how could there have been an energy crisis at all? And, well, the answer lies in the kind of nuclear power Fallout's pre-war world relied on. While the universe is full of nuclear-powered technology, most of it was based on nuclear fission. Vaults had fission reactors. Piper mentioned such when entering the Vault 95 generator room. Repcon used a fission-based propulsion system for their rockets, as mentioned by the tour guide. And the fission battery powered many robots, like Protectrons, evident by the loot they can drop. For those who don't know, fission works by splitting heavy atoms, like uranium or plutonium, to release energy. It's powerful, but it depends entirely on limited natural resources, uranium or plutonium. Duh. And by the 21st century in Fallout's timeline, those resources were drying up. The first Fallout game's intro confirms this, with Ron Perlman saying, "In the 21st century, war was still waged over the resources that could be acquired. Only this time the spoils of war were also its weapons, petroleum and uranium." So it would seem that uranium ore was being mined at an unstable rate to keep up with the demands of the global superpowers. As it became scarce, countries began fighting with one another, thus the resource wars. And so the widespread of fission nuclear power was resulting in a loss of the Earth's uranium. But there is another type of nuclear reaction that could have had the potential to power homes and countries: nuclear fusion power. In real life, we don't really have the technology or means to make fusion reactors possible on a larger scale. And while fusion technology did exist in Fallout, evident by the microfusion cell, it was also still a prototype technology. The Fallout Bible timeline has some more information on fusion tech. According to the Bible, in 2060, fuel became too precious to waste on automobiles, so alternatives were explored. Electric and fusion cars began to be manufactured, but factories could only make limited amounts. This resulted in an increase of pressure for fusion research. Unlike fission, fusion joins lighter atoms, typically hydrogen, to release energy. In theory, it could have solved Fallout's energy crisis entirely. As fusion can use hydrogen found in seawater, it's effectively limitless. It's clean, efficient, and safe. But in Fallout's timeline, fusion never really became widespread. The Fallout Bible continues. In summer 2066, the first crude fusion cell is unveiled. Devices designed for the fusion cell begin to be manufactured. The incorporation of fusion power into the general US infrastructure begins, but the process is too slow to supply power to the regions that need it. Nearly 11 years later, by 2077, few sections of the United States were supplied with fusion power. And this is only talking about the United States, mind you. All the other countries in the world likely didn't have access to this cutting-edge tech. So it would seem that fusion technology was stuck in research labs and military test sites. It was either too expensive or too experimental to be fully rolled out in time before the Great War. And this is one of the reasons that the resource wars were so tragic. The world didn't just run out of oil, it ran out of plenty of other things, including uranium, and with it, the only form of large-scale nuclear power production it had come to rely on. Countries turned to war instead of turning to innovation. If fusion had reached the level of mass adoption, the Great War may have never happened. But it didn't, and thus the world burned. Misconception number 4. The Mojave wasteland is old. When you first take your steps through Good Springs, you quickly realize that the Mojave wasteland feels lived in. The strip is glowing with neon, the NCR has outposts, checkpoints, and supply lines. The Brotherhood is nothing more than a rumor, hiding in the valleys. There are traders, towns, factions, alliances, all signs of a region with a long and complex history. But what might surprise you is just how recent much of that history really is. For starters, Mr. House didn't begin restoring the strip to its former glory until 2274, just 7 years before the start of the game. House says as much when you first meet him. I oversaw the Vegas renovations starting from 2274 onward. He reactivated the Securitron army, negotiated with the three families, and re-established New Vegas as an independent city-state, all within the span of less than a decade. The casinos, the walls, the robots, the entire sense of order and spectacle had barely any time to settle before the courier gets shot. On the other hand, the NCR only entered the Mojave in full force around the same time. According to the New Vegas Game Guide, they engaged the Brotherhood of Steel in 2276 during Operation Sunburst, a battle that pushed the Brotherhood of Steel into hiding, and fought the first battle of Hoover Dam the following year in 2277, just 4 years before the courier's story begins. The War Memorial plaque at Boulder City confirms this, reading, "On this spot in the year 2277, Rangers and soldiers of the New California Republic turned back the forces of Kaiser's Legion during the Battle of Hoover Dam." They couldn't call it the first Battle of the Hoover Dam at that time because that would make someone a time traveler, right? Therefore, Kaiser's Legion didn't cross the Colorado and set up at Fortification Hill until 2277. Their brutal campaign in the east is infamous, bringing dozens of tribes to their knees, but their foothold in the Mojave is still new, fragile, and slowly expanding. Even many local events are recent. The Van Graffs established the Silver Rush in 2276. The Divide was destroyed in 2277. The Powder Gangers didn't stage their prison break until the same year that New Vegas starts, only like a month before the courier takes the Platinum Chip job. The Mojave Outpost, Camp Forlorn Hope, Cottonwood Cove. These aren't well-established hubs and outposts. They are military positions cobbled together in the last few years. So while the Mojave may feel lived in, the power struggle between House, the NCR, and the Legion is shockingly new. The courier isn't stepping into some stalemate status quo. They're arriving at a time when the entire region is still in the process of being shaped. And that's why I don't really get the outrage about the Fallout show heading back to the Mojave. When you look at the timeline, the Courier, House, the NCR, and Kaiser, that conflict, it only makes up a tiny sliver of the region's entire history. The Mojave was here long before the Courier, and I'm sure it'll keep changing long after. War never changes, after all. Misconception number 5. Power armor is indestructible. Our final misconception deals with this topic I've brought up a few times in my shorts and on this channel, and that's the true purpose of power armor. Power armor is one of the most iconic parts of the Fallout universe. So it's not surprising that some think power armor makes you invincible. But let me be clear, power armor isn't indestructible. We take down enemies in power armor all the time. Raiders in rusty scrap suits, Brotherhood patrols in full T60, and even the mighty Frank Horrigan, a walking mutant tank in advanced Enclave gear, gets taken down. These suits don't make man immortal. They just make man harder to kill. Heck, we even see during the Operation Anchorage DLC that they have weaknesses. The power-armored soldiers under General Chase's command are unable to attack the Chinese-occupied refinery until the pulse field they set up is disabled. These suits, they're powerful, yes, but they're not impervious to everything. So if power armor doesn't turn its wearer invincible, what is it for? Power armor's real advantage doesn't come from its defense, rather from its combination of mobility and firepower. It lets soldiers wield the firepower of a tank while still letting them move like infantry. A tank can level a building, but it can't sprint across rough terrain or squeeze through the tight hallway of a bunker. Power armor lets a soldier carry heavy-duty weapons, resist small arms fire, and operate in hazardous environments, all while maintaining the flexibility of a traditional infantryman. Power armor was designed for boots-on-the-ground superiority. The Fallout Bible confirms this with the timeline section reading 2065 August. Increasing need for mobility in the United States mechanized cavalry leads the military to focus the efforts on creating a man-based tank, essentially a two-legged walking armored unit. Power armor. These suits gave troops the ability to push through enemy lines, not shrug off mini-nukes, evident by that one Brotherhood patrol that got a little too close to Nellis. And it's that mobility mixed with firepower that makes power armor truly terrifying. Not because it makes you untouchable, but because it turns you into a walking weapons platform that can go anywhere a regular person can. So no, power armor isn't indestructible, but in the right hands, worn by the right person, it doesn't need to be. Fallout's world at times can be messy, complicated, and unfortunately full of contradictions. But that's part of what makes it so fun to dive into. These misconceptions might seem small, but clearing them up hopefully gives us a clearer picture of the universe that we find ourselves constantly coming back to. That's all from me today, folks. If you like the video, be sure to share and subscribe. What other misconceptions should I cover next? Join the Discord. Have a good rest of your day. Cheers.
You're playing the hand you've been dealt, but you don't let it rest. You shuffle and stack. And a gamble. A gamble that may pay off, but how? Forecast? Rapidly changing conditions.